Today I'll recap a horror crime film, Friday the 13th. Spoilers are coming, so keep your eyes wide open and stay safe. The movie starts with a brief prologue set in 1958. Two summer camp counselors at Camp Crystal Lake, named Barry and Claudette, sneak away from a campfire sing-along to have some private time. But before they can finish what they're doing, an unseen attacker sneaks into the room and murders them both. This scary moment sets the stage for the dark events that will follow. Camp Crystal Lake is about to open for the summer, but there's a legend about a killer lurking nearby. As new counselors arrive, they don't know the terrifying story that haunts the camp. As the counselors start to get ready for the kids, they find themselves in spooky situations. One by one, they fall prey to the mysterious killer. Each scene is filled with suspense, making it hard to look away. The horror grows as they discover what happened at the camp many years ago. The film teaches us to be careful and to respect the warnings from the past. Ignoring the scary stories can lead to dangerous situations. The counselors learn too late that some places hold dark secrets that should not be disturbed. As the story unfolds, the fear builds, and you never know who will survive until the very end. Get ready for a wild ride filled with scares, tension, and unexpected twists. The story jumps forward to present-day Friday, June 13th. A young woman named Annie strolls into a small diner, asking the locals for directions to Camp Crystal Lake. The whole diner freezes, and folks look at her with wide eyes as if she'd said something crazy. An old man named Ralph, who seems a bit off, warns her, "You're all doomed," but Annie just shrugs it off, thinking he's odd. Luckily, a friendly truck driver named Enos offers to give Annie a lift most of the way to the camp. During their ride, he tells her the camp's dark past. A young boy drowned there in 1957, just a year before two camp counselors were murdered. Annie listens, but still plans to start her job at the camp. After Enos drops her off, Annie keeps walking. Soon, another car pulls up, and Annie hops in, thankful for the ride. But as they zoom past the camp entrance, she realizes something's wrong. The driver doesn't slow down, so she panics and jumps out of the moving vehicle. She stumbles into the woods, and before she can catch her breath, the driver chases her down and in a shocking moment, slashes her throat with a Bowie knife. Over at Camp Crystal Lake, a team of young counselors, Ned, Jack, Bill, Marcy, Alice, and Brenda, are busy fixing up the cabins and getting everything ready. The camp's owner, Steve Christie, is there with them, keeping everyone on their toes with his long to-do lists. The group is excited, but things start feeling a little strange. First, there's a prank where one counselor pretends to drown, making everyone scramble to save him before they realize it was just a joke. Then, they get a surprise visit from the local police, who seem wary about the camp's reopening. Tension rises when they find a giant snake hiding in one of the cabins. They manage to chop it in half with a machete, but it leaves them all feeling a bit creeped out. As they keep working, old Ralph shows up again, muttering warnings and saying, "You're all doomed," but the counselors just laugh it off, thinking he's just the local weirdo. Later, with a storm starting to rumble in the distance, Steve heads out to town to grab more supplies, leaving the counselors on their own just as things are about to take a dark turn. Meanwhile, a mysterious figure lurking in the shadows, wearing black slacks, a brown plaid shirt, and a shiny class ring on their left hand, begins targeting the counselors one by one. This unknown killer, whose face is still hidden, watches from afar, waiting for the right moment to strike. Ned notices someone in a hooded black rain slicker heading into one of the cabins. At first, he thinks it's just one of the others playing a prank, or maybe Steve back from town. Curious, he decides to follow them inside to see what's up. He steps through the doorway, unaware of the danger lurking just a few feet away, and disappears into the cabin's shadows. As a wild rainstorm pounds the camp, Marcy and Jack sneak into one of the cabins and snuggle up together on a bunk bed. They have no idea that Ned's body lies lifeless just above them in the top bunk. After a while, Marcy heads off to the bathroom, leaving Jack alone in the cabin. Just as Jack relaxes, the hidden killer strikes from below the bed. Suddenly, an arrow pierces up through the mattress and goes right through Jack's throat, ending his life in an instant. Meanwhile, in the bathroom, Marcy hears a strange sound coming from the showers. She figures it's Jack messing around, so she walks over to pull back the shower curtain, but there's nothing there. She turns around, only to be face to face with the killer, holding a heavy axe. Before Marcy can even scream, the killer swings the axe right into her face, ending her fate as quickly as the storm rages on outside. Bill, Alice, and Brenda are having a fun time playing Strip Monopoly in Alice's cozy cabin. As the rain pours down outside, Brenda suddenly remembers she left the windows open in her own cabin. Feeling worried, she heads off to get things sorted. Once Brenda gets settled in her cabin for the night, she hears a soft, childlike voice calling out, "Help me," from the dark woods. Curious and a little scared, she grabs a flashlight and steps out into the pouring rain, trying to find the source of the voice. Brenda makes her way to the archery range, where the hooded killer suddenly turns on the bright lights, blinding her. In the chaos, she disappears, and we hear her scream, but it happens off-screen, leaving her fate unknown. unknown. Back in the cabin, Bill and Alice hear the scream and rush to check on Brenda. When they get to her cabin, they find a bloody axe, the same one that was used to kill Marcy, lying ominously on Brenda's bed. They look around the camp, but nobody is in sight, and a feeling of dread fills the air. Worried something isn't right, they try to call the police, only to discover that the phone lines have been cut. Panic sets in when their cars won't start, trapping them at the camp just as the storm rages on outside. Meanwhile, Steve is enjoying dinner at a local diner in town, looking forward to heading back to Camp Crystal Lake. After finishing his meal, he hops into his Jeep, which is towing a trailer, ready for the drive home. But things take a turn when his Jeep gets stuck in the mud on a back road. Just then, a passing police officer notices Steve's trouble and offers him a ride part of the way back to the camp. As they drive, the officer gets a call about a car accident in town and has to drop Steve off before he can reach the camp. With the rain finally letting up a bit, Steve starts walking the rest of the way back to Camp Crystal Lake all by himself. When he reaches the camp's entrance, he is met by someone he seems to know, and just like that, he is suddenly attacked and murdered, leaving the camp's dark secret even deeper. When the lights suddenly go out all over Camp Crystal Lake, Bill decides to check on the power generator. He walks to the generator cabin but realizes he has no idea how to fix it or even what's wrong with it. After a while, when Bill doesn't come back, Alice gets worried and goes to look for him. When she arrives at the generator cabin, her heart sinks as she finds Bill's body pinned to the door by several arrows. Now feeling completely alone, Alice runs back to the main cabin, her heart racing, and hides, hoping to stay safe. After a few tense moments of silence, Brenda's lifeless body suddenly crashes through a window, causing Alice to scream in terror. Just when she thinks she might be safe, she hears a vehicle pull up outside the cabin. Thinking it's Steve returning to help, Alice runs out to warn him. Instead of Steve, she finds a middle-aged woman who introduces herself as Mrs. Voorhees, claiming to be an old friend of the Christies. Alice, feeling desperate and scared, tries to tell her about the terrible murders happening at the camp. Mrs. Voorhees looks horrified at the sight of Brenda's body, but then reveals a shocking truth. She is the mother of the boy who drowned in the lake back in 1957. Talking mostly to herself, Mrs. Voorhees starts blaming two camp counselors for her son Jason's drowning, saying they were busy having and didn't notice him struggling in the lake. She reveals to Alice that today is Jason's birthday, and this makes Alice start to worry about where Steve might be. Suddenly, Mrs. Voorhees' mood changes and she becomes violent. She pulls out her Bowie knife, showing her class ring on her left finger, which confirms that she is the killer. With a fierce look in her eyes, she rushes at Alice, but Alice quickly grabs a fireplace poker. She swings it hard and knocks Mrs. Voorhees unconscious, giving herself a moment to escape. A long and terrifying chase follows, with Alice running for her life from her attacker. In her desperate flight, she discovers the bodies of Steve and Annie. Realizing just how dangerous the situation has become, Mrs. Voorhees quickly turns the generator back on, bringing power back to the camp. Then she starts chasing Alice all around the camp in an intense and scary chase, while talking to herself in what sounds like Jason's voice. Alice runs for her life, trying to find a place to hide. Eventually, Mrs. Voorhees corners Alice in a storage shed, but luckily, Alice finds a rifle inside. Just as she's about to load it, Mrs. Voorhees attacks, slapping Alice around and making it hard for her to fight back. With quick thinking, Alice manages to escape and races back to the main cabin, locking herself in the pantry behind a sturdy door. But Mrs. Voorhees is not giving up. She breaks through the door with her machete and rushes in at Alice. In a moment of bravery, Alice grabs a frying pan and hits Mrs. Voorhees on the side of the head, knocking her unconscious. For a brief moment, Alice believes she might finally be safe, thinking Mrs. Voorhees is dead. Alice, feeling overwhelmed, heads out to the side of the lake and sits down next to the water, hoping to catch her breath. But suddenly, Mrs. Voorhees comes rushing at her again, swinging the machete. Alice barely dodges the deadly blade, and the two of them end up wrestling by the edge of the lake. With determination, Alice fights back and finally gains the upper hand. In a shocking moment, she manages to kill Mrs. Voorhees by decapitating her. Alice is now in total shock, her heart racing from what just happened. Feeling like she needs to escape, Alice gets into a canoe and rows out to the middle of the lake, where she can finally be alone. Exhausted from the fight, she drifts off to sleep, hoping she is safe at last. Morning finally arrives, and Alice is still peacefully asleep in the canoe, dreaming away. Suddenly, the sound of police sirens breaks the quiet as they arrive and call out to her. Alice slowly awakens, feeling a mix of hope and confusion about her rescue. But then, just as she sits up, the horrifying, decomposing body of Jason suddenly attacks her. He pulls Alice out of the canoe, dragging her down into the water. Just when it seems like all hope is lost, she wakes up in a hospital, feeling confused and scared. A police officer is there to help her and tells her that they pulled her out of the lake and that everyone at the camp is dead. Alice, still shaken, asks about Jason, hoping to learn more about the boy she fears. The officer sadly informs her that they never found any boy at all. With a worried expression, Alice replies, Then he's still there, glancing out at the peaceful lake, feeling a chill run down her spine. Which movie should we recap next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more movie recaps. Thanks for watching. Produced by Warner Talks.